Okay, there we go. All ready.
Right, well, good. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Delighted to interview and introduce Steve White-Cooper from our Victor. For those who know, we've actually had a long time been talking about bringing sports players into the sector and actually how we can actually look at different talent pools and what they could bring. Steve is an ex-England Rugby player, which I'm sure he'll tell us about as we go through it, but he's set up his own recruitment platform, really representing people from different sectors in terms of sports. And I think that's one thing, particularly as we get to this point, where everyone seems to be struggling to find new talent. So how can we think differently? What can we look at differently when it comes to recruiting from the sector? How can we help people from other sectors come into this sector? And particularly, and I think Steve will elaborate on this, what can they bring as well? Because often recruitment can be at times a bit narrow in the way it looks at things. But I think as we come through now, thanks, Sue. As we come through now, I think it is important that we're more broad-minded in how we look at it and give people from different opportunities. So that's what we'd like to explore. So I'm going to ask Steve to introduce himself in a second, and then we're going to interview Steve as we go and talk between us for about 20, 30 minutes. And then what we'd like to do is open up to get you to quiz Steve and ask him any question you want, because I think this is actually quite an important piece that we discuss. And it's something that's been very close to our hearts for a number of years now. So Steve, firstly, would you just like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, Chris, thanks very much for the invite today. So, yeah, my name is Steve. By background, I'm South African. I came to school in the UK when I was 8 and began playing rugby, did school, university, and I'm kind of showing my age a bit, but when I was in my second year at university, rugby went professional and I was desperate to play straight away. I was fortunate enough to be offered a contract from Harlequins, which was the club I was playing for, and I was desperate to do it. My father said, "You've got to finish your degree." So I was down at Bristol. I finished my degree, and as soon as I graduated, I started playing pro. I was super fortunate. I played 5.5 years, played a lot of first team rugby. I was predominantly England A and got a couple of caps for England. Retired at the age of 27, not really knowing what I was going to do. And initially I got into insurance. I hated it. Really sort of struggled. At the same time, I kind of broke up with a long-term girlfriend. So I had a bit of a sort of mini life crisis. And then I fell into recruitment. I had a friend who was working for an executive search company and joined the firm. But what I could see is once I'd actually committed to it, I could absolutely see the softer skills that I'd gained. And, you know, it didn't happen overnight, but I was definitely one that was very keen to learn. And I was first in, last out. And probably within the space of 2 years, I noticed that I began to catch up on my peers. And again, I was very lucky. It was a small company that was growing very quickly. But the owner of the business trusted me and could see that I had the desire. And with that, I was able to take on more responsibility. I was fortunate enough to become number 2 to the owner of the business. And the business, when I joined, I think I was the 12th employee in. But we then expanded from purely London into New York, Mumbai, and Hong Kong. I stayed there 6.5 years. I then left and set up my own search firm. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking to myself that there was such an opportunity if you could target individuals with the softer skills gained through sport combined with academics. And one of my first clients when I was on my own was Goldman Sachs, and I shared it with a few of the partners, and they absolutely loved the idea and felt it was a talent pool that they hadn't tapped into. And this was just before London 2012. And on the back of that, we ran an out-of-cycle internship that was a huge success. And it was quite cool, actually. About 6 weeks ago, I had a Zoom call with one of our first initial placements. And this was a guy called Rob Williams, who just missed out on a gold medal. He won a silver in the lightweight 4 in 2012, joined Goldman as an FX trader and at associate level. And 8/9 years later, he's now an MD. He's running his own team, and he's done incredibly well. So what we did is we initially focused within finance, and the reason why I did that was because that was the area where I had relationships and experience. And what was critical to me in setting up at Victor was being absolutely clear that I had to prove that the model worked. And actually, if you look at the analytics on both retention and performance, it absolutely smashes industry standards. And you know, Chris, you touched upon the skills that you can gain from sport, and I think, you know, often people think of, you know, drive, determination, resilience, teamwork, etc., and those are absolutely the skills that you can capture. But actually, more than that, I think if you look at something, and I'm not sure if you're aware of something called the QS Skills Gap Report, which is an industry-wide body that effectively goes out and talks to hiring managers around junior talent. And the feedback at the end of 2019, early 2020, the criticisms of young talent was not curriculum-based, but was based around the lack of soft skills. And you know, I firmly believe that we were able to fill that void. And so our talent pool, sport is by far the majority, but we also do the military. And the reason why the military is far smaller is simply down to the sheer numbers that exit the military on an annual basis, and particularly if you focus at that officer level, you know, the numbers are 500. So when you're looking at the sports space, we'll cover everything from Olympians, Paralympians, professional athletes, right the way through to high achieving student athletes. And in my mind, I mean, if I look back on my career within rugby, I certainly wasn't the most talented player at all. But what I did have was a really good work ethic. And, you know, having gone through that experience, you know, everybody is roughly about the same. You'll get some individuals that are better, but there's no doubt that if you put the hard work in, you will catch up and take over. And you know, and I believe you don't have to have played sport at the highest level to have these transferable skills. And you know, a high achieving student athlete for a Victor could be somebody who's played age group international, which is still you know, a very, very high standard, or perhaps just being a very good university player, but decided not to go to the next level. Or it could have been somebody who's been in leadership positions or been part of committees and that type of thing. But from that base and from having proven that model, we've now entered new industries, and we've built an online platform. And so for now, and we're actually looking to keep expanding, but from that base of focusing purely within finance, which is obviously very broad, and we're very sort of proud about our client base within that space that represents all the big global banks. But from that base, we moved into the fintech space, we moved into insurance technology, asset management, real estate, and into the pharmaceutical and consulting space too. And we're just about to enter the medical devices space, and then we're looking at the education sector. But right from my initial conversation with Chris, he emphasized to me about the hospitality space and the need to drive in new talent. You know, I'm absolutely very, very passionate around this space, and I'm biased, I suppose, given my background. But you know, I firmly believe that you get that individual with the suitable academics, with the softer skills gained by sport, combined with a passion to enter a particular sector, and you'll have that winning formula. But just one example, which I think is really, really cool. Just an example of the placement, and why I tell you about this is more about the mentality of what you can get from an athlete is, in 2013, there was a Yorkshire county cricketer. He was born and bred in Yorkshire, a bright guy. He went to Oxford, he'd read physics. And one of our big clients is Citigroup, the global US investment bank. And it's a guy called Joe Sayers. And Joe had a really good career. He was an opening batsman for Yorkshire. He was vice captain. He played for England Lions, which is England's second team in cricket. And Joe came via one of our out of cycle internships with Citi in 2013, got offered a role, joined the analyst program, which was a 2-year rotation, and then coming out of that, he landed on a sales desk called high yield credit sales. And when he landed on that desk, there was a lady who was going on maternity leave. She was a senior VP, this lady. She'd been very successful. She'd done 5.5 million in sales credits. And when she left to go on maternity, she went through a maternity, and right at the tail end of her maternity, she told everybody that she decided that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mum and wasn't going to come back. And so what they did was they took her 7 main accounts that she'd generated all her money, and they gave it to a senior director. And they gave Joe all the small and medium-sized accounts that no one had made any money from. Joe finished his first full year and did 4.2 million. His second year, he did 6.4 million. His third year, he did 14. He got made a VP in the fastest record timing. But I remember the best thing about it, I remember a couple of years ago going for a beer with him, and I turned to Joe and I said, Joe, why do you think you've been so successful? And he, stared back at me and said, Steve, simply, when I get on the tube in Canary Wharf every night and I'm on my way home, he said, I analyze my day from start to finish. And he said, what's amazing is the days where I've actually made money or made the most money, I actually find the least rewarding. And it's actually the days where I've struggled. And why I say that is the days I've struggled, I'm learning in terms of how I can improve. And he said, for me, it's just this constant journey of trying to be the very best I can. And I believe that kind of really sums up nicely, in terms of the mentality that you can get with an individual with that sporting DNA. Sorry, I think that was a bit more than an introduction.
No, it's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because as I'm sure everyone here will agree that everyone's going to be struggling with shortages now of staff. And I think 50% of companies are saying they're struggling to recruit at the moment. And interestingly, of the people they're struggling to recruit, a lot of them aren't what you'd expect grassroots. They're actually managers and leaders. So 38% of those companies, I think it's leadership positions they're struggling at, which is interesting. Now, part of that is because people don't want to come back until there's clarity on what's going to happen with the lockdowns and furlough, which I can understand. But as we come forward, particularly with Brexit, there's going to be a real shortage of skills, not of labour, but of skills. So it's an interesting battle we come from. So I think it's really good to look at sports players. Now, hospitality is going to rely very much on social skills, which actually a lot of sports players are probably very good at, aren't they? The kind of, when you say soft skills, it's the social skills as well, isn't it?
Yeah, to that, absolutely, if you get the right ones. But that said, in any team, you'll get some very analytical, slightly nerdy, not particularly outgoing types of individuals that would be wholly inappropriate. But sure, if you can get the individuals that have the right personality and the right drive, they could absolutely succeed without a doubt. And I think when anyone thinks of an athlete, you immediately think of an environment where you're people led, and it's about building, strengthening relationships and trying to grow the wallet with clients.
And from your perspective, I mean, hospitality is becoming more and more requested as well, isn't it, by the actual athletes as well?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting actually, because from our initial conversations, Chris, right at the outset, within on our online platform, when people register, that they'll create what we call a shop window. And a shop window is like a snapshot in terms of how you position themselves. But in order to register, to create a shop window, there's a huge amount of data that we capture in terms of industries and areas that we would like. And I know we discussed on one of our calls actually how many individuals were actually looking at the hospitality space and seeing that as an area where they would like to build a long-term career.
It is an interesting one, isn't it? And in terms of yourself, you've been in sport and they've made the transition into insurance, which I appreciate you didn't enjoy. But what was the biggest challenges for you to move from sport into a career?
So I think it's for me personally, it was that losing that self-worth, in terms of, and it certainly wasn't that I was anyone well known at all, but you certainly have a label of being an athlete, and you go into a room and people may not know who you are, but they would know that you were a sportsman of some sort, and you kind of had that, and then suddenly that was taken away from you, and you're suddenly starting out. But that was me naively having not probably spent enough time in terms of the planning, and a lot of what we're trying to do as a business. Yes, we match talented individuals with roles is an important part, but a massive part of what we do, and particularly with the platform, is a knowledge hub around educating people to what careers in certain sectors look like. And it's fairly obvious, but if we're able to use, for example, we use Day in the Lives of, and break down sectors, and the more we can educate people around that piece, will only lead to better applicants, that will lead to better retention and better performance, which has to be the win-win, whether you're the client, whether you're a victor, or whether you're the individual.
Now I'm going to bring Sue in here very unfairly, because Sue is launching Chateau Denmark, and you're going out to recruit people who are very different, aren't you? I mean, it's a hotel that's aiming to be very, very different. Would you look at sports players, and if you did, what would you want from them?
That's an interesting one, because I think I have a question first of all that I'd like to know: is there a distinct difference between the sports people who are in a team and the individuals? So, for instance, the golf players, the racing drivers, and things like that. Is there a different mentality from a team player to an individual player as such?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that we're asked quite a bit. And it was interesting because I was actually talking to an Olympic sprinter who was actually an Olympic finalist, and I asked her that question, and her response was actually not what I expected. She said, in order for me to get to an Olympic final, we train every day as a squad, and we're pushing ourselves as a team in order to get there. And when it comes to an Olympic final, yes, I'm the one running, but I wouldn't be there if it wasn't for my coach, if it wasn't for my strength and conditioning, if it wasn't for my nutritionist, my psychologist. And so, her view was, yes, we're going out there, and yes, I'm the individual running straight down that lane for 100 meters, but actually I'm representing all these different people. And if I'm going to be successful, it'll only be because we've been working successfully as a team. And that was her attitude to it. But I think it's a really, really good question. And if I'm honest, we haven't really studied it. And we haven't really looked at the analytics very closely, but it is a question that comes up a lot. But that was just a response from one of the athletes.
Okay. Well, I think, as yet, I haven't had somebody who's been a professional sports person actually apply to us. And that's actually quite surprising, I think. I've had a lot of musicians, I've had a lot of people who've done amazingly different things. I even had a deaf guy apply to me the other day, and it was perhaps one of the most fascinating interviews I've ever conducted. But saying that, I would be very open-minded to talking to anybody, because we're looking for creative people. We're looking for people who are not fazed by challenges. So therefore, I think sports people would definitely, rise to the challenge here. But we're definitely looking for people who can think laterally and can adapt. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's what I'm seeing as I'm talking to people now, is one of the first questions I ask them is, so what have you been doing during the lockdown? And that I find is very revealing. And the number of people who have naturally looked to retrain and to adjust their view on what they see themselves doing coming out of this. So, yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't look at sports people for that reason.
It's one of the interesting mentalities. I was interviewing someone this morning from Switzerland, who's one of the dean of the hotel schools, and he was talking about Bill Shankly, who most of you won't remember, but Steve might, who used to be a famous football manager, and he was saying that it's a mindset thing. So even if he was a road sweep, he'd want to be the best road sweep in Liverpool. But it is that mindset thing, though, isn't it, Steve? That makes sports players slightly different. They have to strive for excellence, which is rare.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I mean, everyone's read about, talked about the 10,000 hours, and Matthew Said's views around that, and 100% that would be the case. If you're going to, you've got to think of, and it's very relevant now, thinking ahead to Tokyo. You've got these individuals who've been preparing for 4 or even now 5 years for these single games, and you can imagine being on an Olympic final if you're a rower, for example. All that 5 years, you've got 1 minute 30 or 2 minutes in order to compete and to get the result that you're hoping for. So absolutely.
I suppose the counter is, can they adapt then to the normal day-to-day stresses of day-to-day life?
Yeah, no, that is an important, although, I would say, having proved the model from what we're doing, that is absolutely doable. But I do think the most important part of this is educating people around what roles look like, and getting their head around that, and then having had their eyes open to the opportunity, they're able to make a proper decision. And I think it becomes a lot easier, particularly as we broaden our sector coverage. Is there's something for everybody, but I think they've got to understand their motivations, what they enjoy, but equally their limitations in order to make the right decision.
I mean, career change is difficult. I mean, Lauren, let's bring you in here, because you've obviously gone through career change. Your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've done it more than once, and I believe you're only allowed to do it 3 times. So I'm on number 3 and I'm done. But it is, and it's that willingness to constantly improve. So I think what you were saying, Steve, that they've got that drive for constant improvement, because the game and the challenges of whatever game or whatever discipline they come from, they're constantly having to learn and improve and read other people's games and learn new tactics. So I think that's the advantage of that mindset when you bring it into business. We constantly say our industry has to be a constant learning mindset, and with sports players, they're already predisposed to that thinking.
Yeah.
Can I bring someone else in? Hannah, can I ask your views on all this?
I was about to throw Hannah under the bus as well.
So, all right.
No, in the nicest way possible, only because Hannah, I wanted to sort of say to Steve, with professional sports players having to deal with VVIPs and social media and being respectful in that space, Hannah has to deal with that sort of environment as well, being involved in the palaces. And I just wanted to tie those 2 things together. Sorry, Hannah, that was my bus.
No, please don't worry. And actually, it's very interesting hearing all the points that you're raising and how they link together, and the ability for people to retrain. And that is something that's so evident to me, that I feel that there are so many transferable skills between different sectors that link up to hospitality as well. And I've always been somebody who has stressed that the skills that you require in hospitality, you don't have to have experience in hospitality to have those. You can do anything and be able to retrain and develop that, and it's integral. And the athletes is really, really interesting, because instantly, as you mentioned yourself, it's the team player spirit and the willingness to learn, which are absolutely key to any industry, whether that's hospitality or any other. And it's vital to be able to interlink those, really. We've actually just gone through big recruitment ourselves, actually, within the household, which I'm sure you can imagine happens a lot across different palaces and residences. And it was interesting seeing the broad range of applicants with every different background, particularly at the moment because of everything that's happened. And we're seeing it, people just wanting a change in pace and a change in environment. And they're thinking, well, actually, what I've done could be relevant in that scenario, or maybe it isn't, but I want to try something completely different. And it's been amazing trying to look at a completely broad range of people and saying, rather than what you have done, what can you bring to us that we can include?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things about recruitment, isn't it? So often it's a negative process. People look at who's got the least minuses, not rather than who's got the most pluses. And I think that's what we've got to shift in now. The skill shortage, got to go, who's going to bring a real difference? And I think that's the interesting piece about the conversation with Steve here, in some ways.
And the other thing to add to, which I haven't touched upon, is at the core of what we do is the whole diversity and inclusion piece. And we're, in starting out and having an idea initially, we were probably 95% male, 5% female, and now we're very proud to be 50-50 on that side. We're also able to target literally the most talented individuals with a BAME background. I actually got a call tonight, a Zoom call with the University of East London. And I think it's a really cool example in that, yes, we work with all the big red brick universities, so that would be the Oxbridges, and then the bigger sports universities, the Loughboroughs, etc. And they're all core partners of what. But you take the University of East London, it's 95% black. It's covers the 5 poorest boroughs of London, but it's exactly the same model in trying to find individuals who've excelled academically, but equally played sports at a high level. And I think that makes our work incredibly interesting, where you're able to see individuals with all these different backgrounds. And I heard from one of the team today that an Olympian silver medalist got placed into a role, and she will be an absolute superstar, down to last week dealing with somebody who's severely disabled, who's doing further maths at Loughborough, who's a Bocker, which I had to sort of Google just to make sure I completely sort of understood it. But I mean, again, brilliantly talented individual that would have overcome adversity and clearly exceptional at what they do. So it is very, very diverse. And to that part, given our relationships with both national governing bodies and also with university sports, we're able to target those individuals that are from their profile, as well as individuals who could be first generation attendees. So it's really, really diverse.
That's really interesting. Terry, can I bring you in this point unfairly? And hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on this? Would you recruit sports players? Would you be open to it?
Oh, yes, I think we most definitely would. Kate is my colleague, so Kate is our company recruiter, and so I think any talent that is diverse and different is what we want to bring to our industry. And like you say, the sports mentality where someone is willing to go the extra mile, is willing to be a team player, are really important in our side of the industry and what we do.
Would you have any concerns? I suppose, what are your concerns be?
Concerns would be whether we may be too boring for them, because we're sort of more contract catering within offices. So, it's not boppy, happy areas. They are closed sites for clients. So they might sort of join us and they go, no, this is not for me. This is just too boring. We don't think it's boring, but we could understand why that, if the individual has got that sort of creative side of it, why they might find something with a closed office that much more different. It is different from other types of hospitality and the sectors that are out there.
But it's a great career to build in, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure what Kate's feelings are.
Okay, you're under the bus. Your thoughts?
So I love the idea of it, because I just think that, sorry about the background noise, I am
No, don't worry.
at the moment. I do think that sportsmen and women have a certain mentality and a certain commitment level too. I think that actually our company culture would suit a lot of sportsmen people. We have a real GEC velo thing. We have, bike rides. We have teams that go running together, pre-COVID, obviously. It is part of our culture. We have our nutritionists and healthy and happy branding and stuff. So it is actually a big part of our culture and what our clients want from us a lot too. They want healthy, happy, all this sort of thing. So I think that actually pulls together quite nicely. I don't think I have many concerns about it, but the only thing would be that we are predominantly Monday to Friday. If it is someone who's still training or competing, it might not fit with them, or it might fit with them. It depends on what they're up to. But I like the idea. That there's a lot of resilience and determination, and unfortunately, in a customer-facing industry, you've got to be resilient. You unfortunately do have to put up with a lot of people sometimes. So, And we've only just recently started recruiting again from the last 12 months, and it is a very different field out there.
I was going to say, how are you finding that?
For want of a better term, very British.
Very British.
Not getting the spread of nationalities and ethnic backgrounds, to be honest, and I think that's a post-Brexit world. We would always get a lot of Spanish, Italian chefs applying, that sort of thing. It is really noticeable that aren't here.
Quite a few have returned home. They won't be coming back. Others have retrained, and they've taken this opportunity to decide, actually, I want to do something completely different with my life. So we are, we've obviously got some that, unfortunately we made redundant that we're now looking to bringing back. Some are still on furlough that we can reuse, but like Kate says, it's now very British.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
The change
I hate to use the term, but
it's absolutely true.
Sue, how are you doing a big recruitment campaign? Are you finding the same?
Actually, it's quite interesting because we had this plan pre-COVID how we were going to do it, and we had all these ideas which were quite out of the box at that stage, and we're finding that our thought process is working really well coming out of this. And I was literally just playing around on LinkedIn, and because I hadn't used it for so long, to put out an advert, and I put out some random advert, and I really didn't know what I was doing, and I just said, I'm looking for hospitality management. Well, so far I've had 200 CVs, and I have to tell you, the quality of the CVs that I've had has been quite astonishing, and I was very pleasantly surprised, and I continue to be. And I found some amazing people, and actually they're not all British, but that may well be because we are in central London. But yeah, I've found fantastic people so far, so I'm quite relieved, actually.
I bet you are. I was going to say, Steve, you're still saying that in a month's time, I guess. Well done. That's good news, though. Kelly, can I ask your views?
Yeah, I'll be really honest that it's not an area that I personally would have even thought to tap into. But, look, we need to think creatively. We need to try and attract different types of people. And I think in FM particularly, we have a reputation of recruiting the same profile of individuals. So with my HR hat firmly on, because I'm not a recruiter, to be clear, I'm a business partner, with my D&I hat on, I'm thinking about attracting different types of people into the organisation to future-proof our business. Then it's kind of opened my mind, if I'm being honest. It's not something that I would have typically, my head wouldn't go to it naturally. But I guess that's kind of the purpose of these types of calls.
Absolutely.
And I think the work for us would be in a little bit of, a lot of culture change, kind of impressing upon the managers that, to one of your earlier points, don't just look at a CV and think, cross, they've not got what I need. Think about what they have got and how you might look at that slightly differently. So I think definitely something for us to consider. But for me, my head's going straight to, we need to get the right messaging out to our hiring managers across our business, so that they don't immediately think that's not a relevant CV, goodbye. And really like the idea of recruiting from a more diverse workforce, because we're always really, really keen on making sure that we're as diverse as possible. So yeah, interesting.
I agree on that. I mean, the FM kind of facilities management sector, Steve, is probably something that would appeal to sports players, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it, but absolutely. But I think the biggest part would be, as I said before, is educating individuals around the opportunities that exist and what a career can look like within certain spaces, where, if I'm honest, I don't really have a knowledge of myself. But just to open people's eyes and seeing examples of talent coming into the industry and what they've done and what progression could look like, that would be the biggest part. And one of the biggest things that we do now is run webinars. And for example, we did our last one in February, and we did 5 different industries over 5 days, and got, either senior individuals from HR or senior individuals within the business to present, and then give examples of individuals that come from an athlete background to be part of that process as well, to really kind of explain the skills that they developed through sport and how they've used it in that specific career. But I think that education piece would be critical. But certainly, as I mentioned before, in terms of people signing up and highlighting hospitality as an area which they'd love to get into, there absolutely is appetite.
Yeah. What do you find, out of interest, the other side? What's your biggest barrier, stroke frustration you find when you're working on assignments, Steve?
Like anybody within the recruitment space, it can often be, the pace at which, hiring managers want to operate. What we tend to find with our talent is there's a very quick turnover, and so we submitted shortlists for somebody within the insurance sector last night, and we've been on the phone with them, and it's just important. I mean, on these particular assignments, I think the talent that we've identified is absolutely spot on. But again, if they're not able to react quick enough, there is churn. And I've got to say, probably the most that I've seen in a very, very long time. And it's no doubt on the back of the pandemic, one thing, and then obviously Brexit being finalised, is it is very, very busy.
How has the pandemic impacted on sports growers, and particularly kind of university athletes?
Well, to be honest, I mean, purely from a recruitment stance, I mean, when we had that first lockdown in March, for the first 3 months, it was, everyone was like rabbit in headlights, didn't have a clue in terms of what was going on. And you can imagine from a revenue stance, it just sort of dried up. That said, companies began to adapt to the new norm in terms of working remotely. And to that extent, actually, I wanted to say something earlier about it. I mean, we've seen a number of hiring managers that have come to us and said, actually, they feel that the ability to look at the next generation coming through and have more of a workforce which is more agile, with the ability to, obviously work sometimes within an office, but equally be able to work remotely, greatly plays to the strength of our candidate pool.
Really interesting. Christian, can I bring you in at this point?
Yeah, of course. One thing that I was interested in was how you would manage, or how you see the transition from elite level sports people, in terms of, if you've ever seen when Francesco Totti, who played for Roma for many years, retired, he made this great speech where he said, playing football for so long effectively allowed him to remain as a child, and he was so happy and fortunate for that. How do you think we can, or one could, help with that transition from those types of environments into, I also work in contract catering, mainly in schools, and as someone alluded to there, it might seem potentially slightly boring if you've been doing such a kind of varied and had such an interesting life from an elite sports perspective. Yeah, I mean, I would, having done this for a number of years, I think there is some elements of that are definitely quite sexy, and playing in front of a crowd, and occasionally winning things and that kind of thing, and that can be amazing. But actually behind the scenes, in terms of the monotony of what you're doing day in, day out, can sometimes be overlooked. And so again, in order to be able to perform and to get on that podium, the amount of hours that are done behind the scenes, which are incredibly repetitive and frankly boring, is huge. So I don't think that is so much of an issue. But I do think it's really spelling out what a career can look like, and taking a longer term view.
But I suppose, going back to Kelly's point, it's also about educating the recruiter, isn't it? Mm-hmm. How to recruit a sports player and what they're looking for in terms of skills.
Yeah, definitely, and thinking about those softer skills. But I know I sound a little bit repetitive. It's really that education piece, opening candidate's eyes. And what I can say, and we were discussing it in an internal meeting this morning, provided people really understand what they're getting to, got their eyes open. It's amazing how sticky our candidate base is, and we are able to make placements, but it's all around motivation.
Very interesting. So, Christian, return to you. Would you be open-minded to recruitment sport?
Oh, absolutely. As people have already mentioned, the number of skills that are there. Mentioned in terms of soft skills is something we're very much keen on and talk about often in our recruiting. We try and recruit on personality as much as possible, because that's, I guess, for most people where we really see the value. And I really like the piece that you said there about not doing it as a what isn't there or what doesn't match against or map across against what is there and what we can grow and what might have kind of potential for us, or a point of difference that many of us won't have realized because we've been doing the same thing for a long time, and someone could come in and go, well, I've got this different point of view, and that leads us to kind of move on in a more positive direction.
It's going to be a fascinating, isn't it, time, because we are going to move from having so many candidates in the marketplace to having hardly any, and how we compete is going to have to shift completely.
Yes, absolutely. I think one thing for hospitality, which I think is a real plus that I've reflected on and maybe we've seen as a result of the pandemic, is it's a role where you do get to be with people because of the nature of the role. And I think some people have been drawn to that. And we had a lot of people, of our team members who were on when we were locked down or when they were furloughed, said the thing they missed the most was being around people every day. And actually they wouldn't want to be in a role where they couldn't. So maybe some people have kind of woken up and thought, oh, actually, I can have just as a rewarding career in other areas and get that interaction with people. And I don't have to be in my four walls on kind of Zoom meetings all day, as it were. Not that there's anything wrong with those, of course.
No, don't worry. I mean, it's an interesting one because hospitality actually has so much to sell itself. We never really sell ourselves, do we?
No, like you said, sometimes even we mentioned earlier, we can feel like it might be a little mundane or pedestrian, but it is a wildly varied industry with lots of different areas that you can pick up on and take an interest in. And yeah, we probably should sell ourselves a little.
No, we definitely should. Sue, your thoughts on that? I know you're going to say you're selling yourself with the videos, but as an industry, we need to do far more, don't we?
Yeah, I do believe that. And I think over the years, even before I was working on Chateau Denmark, I always like to listen to people's stories, because when you listen to that, you pick up so many passions and skills that they've got that they don't necessarily know that they've got. And I think that then can translate into so many different roles. And certainly from my perspective, that's what I'm looking for at the moment. So.
Chris, it also goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about as EP for a long time, and a lot of what we are trying to do for the future is that it's maybe a perfect storm with Brexit, maybe a perfect storm with the pandemic, is learn from other industries. That we've been so insular in our thinking, in our exposure. We've always, like, you know, to Kelly's point and everyone else, we've always done the same thing. And EP, we've spoken for so many years about how important it is to get perspectives, to get thinking, to get knowledge share from other industries to help us look at things differently, because we are used to looking at it with the same eyes. And maybe because of the pandemic and everyone is looking at their businesses with new eyes, bringing in other eyes to contribute to that conversation or to contribute to that futuring of it, it's a great time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Look, I'm a firm believer in that. The challenge, I guess, and please tell me where I'm wrong, is actually as teams get up and running again, it's getting them up and running as well. I think more broadly as well. Is that fair? Kate, you're nodding your head. Better ask you.
We are learning more and more over the last even just couple of weeks. That's why Terry's laughing as well. People have, and it's not to their detriment at all, but they've forgotten how to work.
Yeah, I know.
Forgotten it. Some of our sites have been open for over a year now, so people are, whether they've gone off and done something else, that's their own thing. But we've had some odd happenings where people have just forgotten what they're doing, and so now we've had to look at, from a training perspective, putting together training plans and getting people back just a few days, a month, you know, prior to them coming back, just to ease them back in. Because
so how do you feel? How do you feel reopening next week?
Well, not all of our sites will be reopening next week because majority of our sites are at the client's discretion. So we've got some June, July, August. We've got some that are still saying December. So it's very much, hopefully will ease in nicely, but we have a bad feeling it's going to hit like a ton of bricks in July. But I think the site that I'm in at the moment, for example, we've been open nearly all the way through. We're commercial. So we cannot wait to have people sitting back in the cafe and have that vibe and that feeling back in here. Cannot wait. All just, yeah, really excited for it, to be honest. But we've got some more corporate sites, for example, that are being very, very slow to reopen. And some of those guys, as I say, haven't worked for a year. So we're now putting together plans just to get them back in, even a day a week over the next few months, if it's going to be longer, just to keep their eye in, basically. And from a mental health perspective as well, you know, getting them traveling into London, chatting to people again, all those things that a lot of people are really nervous about.
Well, it's really interesting you've touched on the mental health.
It's definitely
it's a really good question, actually, because Steve, going back on mental health, because one of the reservations has always been that so many sports players, once they stop their career, they do struggle. Is that just a rumor, or is that actually a truth piece?
No, I think historically it still is, but I think it very much is down to the individual and where they are on their journey. And you know, sadly, you can sometimes see that where somebody's had a career-ending injury out of nowhere and haven't done the planning. The biggest thing in, you know, as I mentioned, in terms of building our online platform, has been trying to get individuals, literally, you know, whether you're your first week at university, first week on an Olympic cycle, just starting an academy, getting into professional sport, you know, there should be a duty of care on behalf of all the associations for people to begin to plan at that stage. And it doesn't matter who you are, you should begin at that stage, because that's the reality of professional sport. And, you know, anyone starting out at the age of, you know, 18, 19 may have a dream to play until you're 34, 35, but in reality, you know, it might be injury or might be, you know, your contract's terminated. And
why did you retire at 27? Huh?
To be honest, I was, one, I had a little bit of pressure from my father, if I'm honest. But secondly, I felt in my heart of hearts, you know, I'd probably done what I wanted to do. I probably would have played for England more than my 2 caps. But I was never going to play 50 times because I just wasn't that good. And so to that extent, I think it was easier for me to walk away at that point. Also, you know, from a club perspective, I played 100 odd times for first team rugby. And in my mind, whether I played 100 or 300, I didn't view there being a huge amount of difference for me. And, you know, with hindsight, it's probably a wise thing, because I mean, the body is taking bigger hits now from rugby, and it's been fairly vocal around concussion and various other things. So I probably was quite fortunate to finish when I did.
One of the things I've found when in dealing with sports players is that's why something you just touched on there is you're incredibly honest about them, about your own failings, which I always think is fascinating. Because I remember talking to an England cricketer who was delighted when he'd been dropped because he knew he'd been faking it. You'd never get someone in business saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, I think I think on the mental health issue that you, there's obviously been a number of high-profile individuals that have come out and made it far, far easier for people to be honest and open around issues that they are facing, and it's brilliant. It's still, to a large part, despite that, I think, you know, particularly in male changing rooms, you know, it can still be quite sort of a kind of macho environment where someone doesn't want to look weak. But I think those are being broken down, and it's massively helpful where, you know, big names, you know, are often vocal about some of the experiences that they've felt during their time in sport.
We're down to the last few minutes. Steve, do you want to give a final message to people? Because obviously that people are open-minded. Would you like to give a final message about Advictor and what you can do to work with those people?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to, you know, I'd love to speak further about Advictor and have an opportunity to share with you, you know, our online platform and to share with you some of the talent. You know, as I mentioned, I'm super passionate about the space, and I feel it's a bit of a no-brainer if you can get somebody who has the right drive, the suitable academics, and a real desire to get into this particular space. And I'd be very keen to look to partner with different businesses and really try and push the hospitality space, because I do believe that there is already a lot of interest, and then I think there'll be a massive opportunity for people to open their minds to really understanding what a career could look like. So yes, in short, I'd be very keen to chat further.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, Steve, today. Lauren, because actually leadership and talent development is one of our passions. So as we come to the last minute, do you want to just say a couple of words about Retrovo, Lauren?
Yes, absolutely.
Because Simon Halliday, who's ex-England Rugby, is the one who introduced me to Steve. He's also the chair of this new piece we're doing in terms of leadership development. Sorry, I cut across.
I'm used to you interrupting me.
No.
Leadership development is massively important for us, and a lot of you know, because you're part of our friends and family network, that we were working on it for a long time. We are about to launch a platform, again, because we believe that leadership and continuous learning shouldn't be insular. It shouldn't be restricted only to industries or only to geographies. We can learn from all industries, all geographies. We just need to enable a platform or an environment for young talent or talent to be able to do that. So Retrovo is a business that we are launching. Website, God willing, is going to be the end of this week. And then we've actually got an app which we're launching in June, which will be able to connect talent all over the world with incredible leaders from all over the world. Because I often find, me being ex-solicitor, and I appreciate it's not always the same everywhere, but sometimes we're arrogant in our thinking that we are only mentored by our own industry. We only have the thinking and the knowledge of our own industry, but there's so many industries out there. There's so much diversity and thinking out there we can learn from and bring back into our businesses to improve our businesses. So that's exactly what we are doing and launching, and we will be telling you all about it as soon as there is a show and tell to show and tell. So yes, very passionate, very excited, and again, helping young leaders, because we keep, and it's very true, young leaders have had a really hard time in this pandemic.
Well, and again, the really interesting thing about the app is we've interviewed 120 leaders from across the world, and their openness and candor during this period of time about failure, particularly, and how failure has impacted on them, has been refreshing. So I do think there's something really exciting beginning to emerge about how people look at talent and talent development and HR and the whole human piece, asset piece, as we go forward.
And their careers don't go in a straight line. I mean, like Steve says, you start off believing that you're going to be playing for a very long time, or you're going to be, a restaurateur or a solicitor, and suddenly you take a, detour, and that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So often to show talent that the more diverse your career is, the more whole you are as a person, the more you've got to give. So yes, very exciting times.
We will share Steve's details for you, anyone who wants to reach out afterwards. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been appreciated. Steve, thank you so much for your time. I think this.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.